In this episode, an Arctic conservationist is targeted as prey by a hungry polar bear while fast asleep in his tent. Without warning, the polar bear grabs the man out of his tent while still wrapped in his sleeping bag, unable to escape. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the terrifying polar bear attack on Johan Kootte. Welcome to Final Affliction. In the northernmost part of the planet is a frozen wilderness of pristine white where the sun never truly sets, the Arctic. The sea here is a dark, icy mirror that reflects the northern lights as they dance across the night sky. The cold winds howl over the glaciers, carving out majestic peaks and deep valleys. The land is stony and full of extremes, where survival is a struggle against the harsh elements. Only the fittest of creatures thrive here, and among them are the kings of the Arctic, polar bears. The polar bear's snow-white fur coats blend with their surroundings, providing the much-needed camouflage during hunting. They have thick layers of fat that insulate them against the freezing temperatures. Their paws are massive, providing enough traction for traversing the icy terrain. Standing at over 9 feet tall and weighing over 900 pounds, they are a terrifying symbol of the massive extent of the Arctic. However, their population has seen a massive decline, a clear indication of human activities on the planet. This has led to a rise in the number of nature reserves and conservation agencies within the Arctic, as they race to fight for the preservation of wildlife and nature in the region. Johan Jacobus Kootte was a Dutch conservationist and wildlife explorer who loved animals. For years, he had lived in the most remote areas and battled with extreme weather conditions where he worked, maintaining campsites for nature research and conservation groups. He had a blog where he would document his encounters in the wilderness as well as the ups and downs of living in such areas. At the height of the pandemic in 2020, Michel van Dijk contacted Johan and offered him the job of managing the Svalbard campsite in the Netherlands. Svalbard is an archipelago located in the Arctic, only 800 miles from the North Pole, with temperatures ranging from -13 Celsius to 7 Celsius. It's one of the coldest places on the planet. The terrain is covered in a blanket of ice and snow, with the only sign of life being the hardy plants that cling to the rocky soil, Arctic wildlife, and the nature reserves, among them the one Johan was managing. This icy tundra stretches far and wide as the northern lights dance in the night sky. It is a sanctuary for rare and endangered species like the Arctic fox, Svalbard reindeer, and polar bears. Here, the polar bears not only outnumber humans, but are also the most vicious and ferocious killing machines at the North Pole. They hunt and mercilessly take down any prey that fits in their food pyramid, from the chubby sea lions and seals to the occasional human. What's worse is that the number of polar bear attacks are rapidly increasing year over year. The bears are ice-dependent, and as the global temperatures rise, the ice sheets melt, making it harder for them to ambush seals. Without the ice sheets, they stand little to no chance of catching a seal while in the water. This, in return, has forced the bears to seek peculiar food sources closer to human habitation, often sighted hanging around garbage dumps, and at times they cross paths with humans, as what happened with Johan. On the evening of Thursday, the 27th August 2020, Johan stood outside his tent after a tiresome day in the freezing weather. He watched the snow-covered terrain reflect the warm colors of the setting sun. As the last rays of the sun disappeared, the purple and green auroras of the northern lights spiraled and swirled across the sky. How can such a harsh place be this beautiful? He thought to himself as he got into his tent to sleep. Inside the tent, Johan slipped into his sleeping bag and watched as the hypnotizing snowflakes danced in the soft light of his headlamp. His eyes grew heavy and his body relaxed as he gradually sunk deep into his warm sleeping bag. He slowly drifted off into sleep as the winds howled outside. The biting cold of the Arctic was not a bother, as he felt at peace, lulled into deep slumber by the rhythm of nature. In the wee hours of Friday the 28th, around 4 a.m., Johan was unaware of the danger lurking outside. A massive polar bear that had breached the campsite was roaming the place. About 2 meters from the tent, the bear paused, stood on its hind legs, and tasted the chilly air. Its fur glistened in the moonlight as its glowing eyes fixed their gaze on Johan's tent. The smell of a possible meal had led it right to the tent. Sleeping, Johan didn't hear a thing as the bear approached with its paws ready to strike, and in one swipe, it tore the tent wide open from top to bottom. The bear then peeked in the tent, sniffing, throwing and spewing the tent's contents all over in an attempt to secure a meal. The commotion of the hungry bear woke Johan from his slumber. His tent had been crumpled and his items strewn over the stony, snow-covered terrain. He then saw the silhouette of the polar bear as their eyes met. For a moment, he froze. He didn't have time to slide out of his sleeping bag and run to safety. The bitterly cold air hit his face, bringing him back to reality. He quickly slid back inside his sleeping bag and zipped himself in, attempting to hide. With its mouth wide open, the bear lunged forward and clamped its jaws down on the sleeping bag. The bear's grip onto the bag allowed it to effortlessly lift and carry him. Its sharp teeth pierced the bag and tore into Johan's flesh. Johan screamed in terror as the bear began dragging him and the bag far from the tent. Unfortunately, his screams were muffled by the sleeping bag wrapped tightly around him like a cocoon. He was paralyzed with fear. Like hyenas, the scavengers of Africa, polar bears also eat their prey before killing it. Using its claws, it ripped through his clothes and sunk into his skin, leaving deep bites. The white snow stained bright red as Johan's blood spilled out. He was powerless to resist and unable to escape the deadly grasp of the bear as it relentlessly began mauling him. With a final roar, the bear swiped its claws, landing a fatal blow on Johan. Researchers and Johan's colleagues heard the growls of the bear and exited their tents armed and ready. They fired their rifles at the polar bear as it disappeared into the night, leaving behind only the echoing sound of the shots fired and a motionless body of Johan. They quickly rushed to help salvage Johan's critical condition, but they were too late. He was dead. A few hours after dawn, the body of the polar bear was discovered in the parking lot of a nearby airport. It had dragged its injured body before succumbing to the shots from the incident with Johan. At the campsite, the tent had been torn open with its contents scattered on the ground, while the sleeping bag had been dragged yards away from the tent. Johan's colleagues and the locals were deeply devastated and had to undergo counseling. Authorities emphasized on the need for locals and tourists to carry weapons when outside urban areas. Campsites were also advised to erect strong bear-proof perimeters to keep away these kings of the Arctic. After all, tents in bear territories are like tissue paper in a hurricane. They stand no chance. Since 1973, the Arctic polar bears of Svalbard have been a protected species, and shooting them is only allowed as a last resort in self-defense. In 2015, a tally conducted showed that there are approximately 1,000 polar bears in Svalbard. Today, the area is dotted with placards warning about the tenacity and savagery of polar bears. Johan's attack was the first deadly incident in 9 years and the 6th fatal encounter in 50 years in Svalbard. He never wavered in his dedication to the cause, despite the harsh conditions and the nature of his work. He was a true conservationist, driven by a deep love for nature and its protection for generations to come. The death of the polar bear would have saddened him, despite it attacking him. As a hero of the Arctic wilderness, his efforts shall live on forever after his unfortunate final affliction.